Imagine for a moment the Garden of Eden, the pure air, the gentle breeze, and nature in its most untouched form. In the distance, the sound of flowing waters, and at the heart of this paradise, Adam and Eve, creatures formed by the very hands of God, dwell in full communion with the Creator. Everything seems perfect, all is peace. But there, among the leaves and shadows of the garden, something moves, something that escapes our immediate understanding. And it is here that we encounter one of the most intriguing figures of the Bible, the serpent. How many times have you heard this story? How often has the serpent been described merely as a simple animal, a crawling and deceitful being? But what if I told you that there's much more than meets the eye? What if this creature, this serpent, concealed a secret so deep, so ancient, that it would challenge everything you believe about the beginning of humanity? The question that remains is, are we prepared for this? Can we look beyond what has always been taught to us? In the original Hebrew text, the word for serpent is nahash, a term that, at first glance, seems simple. Nahash, serpent. But what if this word carried other meanings? Something more than a crawling creature? Imagine that nahash could also mean diviner, or one who practices enchantments. Suddenly, the serpent that slithers among the trees of Eden begins to take on new colors, a depth that goes beyond what we have considered. Are we dealing with a mere animal, or with a much more complex entity, something that is beyond our immediate comprehension? Could the serpent be a divine figure, a being with uncommon power and wisdom, not just a deceiver, but a holder of ancient knowledge? Could it be that, as ancient mythologies suggest, this figure was linked to wisdom and immortality? Consider the ancient Mesopotamian or Egyptian civilizations, where serpents were seen as powerful symbols, often associated with wisdom or even eternal life itself. What if what happened in Eden was more than a simple act of disobedience? And have you ever wondered if the serpent represents something much greater? Perhaps a symbol of chaos, of disorder that challenges the divine order? Or perhaps the serpent is not an entirely malevolent entity, but rather a symbol of the conflict that dwells within each of us. The deep desire to know more, to understand more, to seek something beyond our immediate grasp. Are there moments in your life when you find yourself divided between what you know you should do and what you wish to know, experience, achieve? Eden is more than a garden lost in time. It is a living metaphor of our own dilemmas, our thirst for knowledge, and the limits imposed upon us. Could the forbidden fruit be the first step toward self-awareness? And the serpent, an agent that propels us into this relentless quest? Have you ever caught yourself pondering what it would be like to live a life without this restlessness? Without the desire to know more, to challenge boundaries, to look beyond what has been given to you? Eden, the serpent, the fruit, they all still live within us, questioning us at every step we take. So I ask you, how far are we willing to dive into this mystery? How prepared are we to look beyond the crawling serpent and see what it truly represents? And what do you make of all this? The story of Adam and Eve is undoubtedly one of the most profound in religious tradition, both in Judaism and Christianity. It is not just an ancient tale. It pulses with life, filled with deep questions about the human condition, about who we are, and about our choices. Take a moment to reflect. Why does this narrative touch us so deeply? Adam and Eve are more than characters from a distant story. They are reflections of ourselves, of our daily struggles between innocence and temptation, between obedience and curiosity. When you consider your own choices, how often do you find yourself in similar moments? That internal tension that arises when you know what you should do, but something deeper, almost irresistible, calls you to another path. The Garden of Eden, in its perfection, becomes the stage for a drama that continues to echo throughout eternity. At the center of it all is the forbidden fruit. So small, so simple, yet burdened with the weight of an entire world. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a promise of wisdom, but also the beginning of a fall. Why would God place this tree there? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Why, in the midst of the garden's perfection, was there something that could not be touched? Temptation is not just an external force, but something that begins within our own hearts. As the Bible says, the heart is deceitful. Yet at the same time, we are created in the image and likeness of God, with a desire to understand, to learn, to grow. Imagine the moment when Eve approaches the tree. What did she feel? Was the weight of the choice already clear in her heart? Or was it the pull of curiosity, that small voice whispering, "What if?" How many times have you stood before a difficult choice, knowing that crossing that line could change everything? And, like Eve, have you also wondered, what lies beyond what I know? Adam and Eve are mirrors of ourselves. We are beings of desire, of search. We want to understand the world around us. We want to uncover mysteries. We want to feel closer to the divine. But with this thirst comes responsibility. And this is where the story becomes so relevant. The innocence of Adam and Eve was not merely ignorance. It was a purity that many of us at some point in life have felt a longing for. Do you remember when things were simpler? When right and wrong seemed clearer? But like them, at some point we crossed that line. And what do we find on the other side? Wisdom, yes, but also a burden that can never be released. What does this mean for us today? Amid modern temptations, are we repeating the story of Adam and Eve? And when we fall, do we hide from God as they did? Or do we run to Him seeking redemption? I ask you, if you were in Adam and Eve's place, what would you have done? Could you resist the desire to know what lies beyond? Or would you be drawn by the promise of something greater, something divine? The story of Adam and Eve is not just about them. It's about all of us, about our daily choices, about how we deal with our temptations, and about how deep down we long for a deeper connection with the Creator. When we talk about Genesis, we usually think of the straightforward narrative, the serpent, the fruit, the fall. But there is something hidden in the original Hebrew text that often goes unnoticed. Let's dive into the depth of this text and uncover a mystery that could change the way we understand this story. The word that describes the serpent, nahash, is not just an ordinary term. In Hebrew, nahash means serpent, yes, but it also carries other nuances. Have you ever stopped to consider how a single word can hold such vast meanings? Beyond serpent, nahash can refer to a diviner, someone who practices enchantments, someone with deep knowledge of hidden mysteries. So, what does this tell us about the serpent's identity? Are we dealing with just an animal? Or is it possible that behind this figure lies something more? An entity with the ability to see the unseen, to manipulate, to enchant. The serpent not only questions the divine order, but also seems to offer an alternative path, a route to knowledge that Adam and Eve had not yet possessed. Imagine the power of this. Someone who approaches and whispers, offering a perspective beyond what was commanded. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't it echo within us the desire to see beyond, to know more, to seek what is forbidden? In ancient times, serpents were associated with many symbols. In Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and countless other cultures, serpents were seen as bearers of wisdom, linked to immortality, to eternal life. Could this ancient tradition also be present in Eden? Could the serpent, in offering the fruit, be offering more than simple disobedience, but rather a path to a new reality? But there's tension in this. On one hand, the serpent seems to be a figure that challenges the divine order. On the other, it is an agent of knowledge. And what about the chaos it may bring? In so many ancient mythologies, like the Babylonian, serpents are also figures of disorder, of breaking a sacred balance. Perhaps here, we are faced with a symbol that challenges everything we know about what is order and what is chaos. Have you ever stopped to think about how these ideas connect to our lives? How many times do we find ourselves in situations where we want to break away from what we've been given? We want to challenge the status quo, we want to seek more. And yet, in doing so, we often bring chaos. We are constantly walking that fine line between order and disorder, between obedience and rebellion. The serpent may very well be a reflection of our own internal struggles, between what we ought to do and what we desire to know. The pursuit of knowledge always comes with a price. And like Adam and Eve, we often don't know what lies on the other side of that choice. Have you ever felt this tension in your own life? This desire to see beyond, even knowing that the path may be uncertain? The serpent represents more than a mere tempter. It symbolizes that deep impulse, that relentless search we all carry within us. So how do we interpret this figure? Is it a symbol of temptation or an invitation to transcend? An agent of chaos? or a catalyst for wisdom. When we look at the serpent in the Garden of Eden, we are led to believe it is just a deceiver, a villain that ruined Adam and Eve's harmony with God. But what if the story is more complex? What if the serpent had a much larger role than simply inducing disobedience? Consider the idea of the serpent as a catalyst. It doesn't force Eve to eat the fruit, but places her before a choice: to remain in the safety of innocence, or to take a leap into the unknown, self-awareness. And what if the act of eating the forbidden fruit was more than just a transgression? What if it was the crucial transition for Adam and Eve to discover what it truly means to be human? It's a troubling thought, isn't it? But think about it. The serpent didn't lie about the fruit. Eve didn't die immediately after eating it, and her eyes were indeed opened. So is the serpent merely a deceiver? Or is it the one that challenges the order to open doors to something greater? Have you ever encountered situations in life where something or someone pushed you out of your comfort zone? And in the end, despite the pain of the process, you realized it brought growth, a new perspective? In this sense, the serpent can be seen as a symbol of transition between two states, from innocence to wisdom, from ignorance to self-knowledge. Is that role, then, as evil as it seems? The Bible speaks of angels and messengers who serve as both guides and provocateurs. What if the serpent, in a way, was fulfilling a larger purpose that on the surface seems destructive, but deep down opens the path to human consciousness? Here, the story of Adam and Eve becomes a much more complex journey, filled with nuance. It's not just about a fall, but about the beginning of a quest for something greater, for a deeper understanding of themselves, the world, and God. Eden, then, is not just a paradise lost, but the place where humanity's fundamental conflict begins: the desire to know, the desire to become something more. And have you ever thought about this? Have you felt in your own life the weight of choices that led you down a different path? A path where, even with losses and pain, you gained a deeper understanding of who you truly are. In our own gardens of Eden, do we not face the same choice that Adam and Eve faced? And like them, are we not driven by a force that compels us to discover something beyond what we already know? At its core, the serpent is more than just a simple villain. It makes us question, it forces us to choose, it compels us to look into the unknown and ask, what if? Now, let us pause and consider one of the most intriguing passages from the book of Genesis, where the serpent makes its entrance. In Genesis 3:1, the serpent is introduced as Arum, often translated as cunning or crafty. But why this emphasis on its cunning? What does this detail reveal about the true role of the serpent? Imagine for a moment the scene. Eve walks through the garden, surrounded by perfection, by a peace we can hardly imagine. She knows what is good, she walks with God, and yet there, in the shadows of the trees, the serpent appears. Not aggressively, not as a visible threat, but with cunning, a being intelligent, inquiring that causes Eve's mind to work in a different way. This introduction in Genesis suggests that the serpent is not merely an animal, but a being with capacities beyond what one would expect. Arum speaks of intelligence, of craftiness, of someone capable of manipulating reality with carefully chosen words. And have you ever experienced moments when a choice seemed clear, but then suddenly questions arose that made you doubt? The serpent begins with a simple, almost innocent question. Did God really say that? How many times in life, when faced with important decisions, does that same doubt arise? That inner voice that makes us question our certainties, our directions. Is what we believe to be the right path truly the right one? Or is there something hidden behind what was said? The serpent does not force Eve. It presents an alternative. And this is where the power of its cunning truly manifests. Instead of directly confronting the divine order, it offers a new perspective. You will not surely die, says the serpent. Your eyes will be open and you will be like God. What a tempting promise, isn't it? Not just to live, but to see the world in a new way, with open eyes, with the ability to discern good and evil, like the Creator himself. This offer profoundly stirs something in Eve. It is not just a matter of disobedience, it is a matter of desire, to draw closer to something greater, to want to be more, to want to transcend the limits imposed. And isn't this the very dilemma we constantly face? The pursuit to be more, to see more, to understand more. Eve is not merely being deceived, She is being led to an existential crossroads. What is better, to remain in the safety of what was said, or to risk, to expand, to discover what lies beyond? And we, in our moments of doubt, ask ourselves, should we follow the path already laid out, or open a new door, not knowing what lies on the other side? The serpent, with its cunning, does not act solely as a tempter. It causes Eve, and by extension all of us, to face our deepest desires. That yearning to be like God, to understand the world and ourselves in a deeper way. Now, think about this. When you are faced with a decision, what voices guide your choice? What lies behind the questions that arise in your mind? Just like Eve, have you ever been tempted by the promise of something greater? Something that could change your perception of life? These questions still echo today because deep down, the serpent still speaks to us. We still hear that voice in moments of doubt, in moments of seeking something beyond what we can see. The serpent, with its cunning and promises, didn't stop at merely questioning what God had said. In Genesis 3:4-5, it makes a bold declaration to Eve, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Here we find the turning point, the critical moment where the serpent's offer goes beyond doubt. It promises wisdom, a wisdom that would bring not only knowledge but also likeness to the Creator himself. Doesn't that promise echo within each of us, this desire to understand what is hidden, to see what others do not? Eve listens carefully, and there is something in that promise that deeply seduces her. It is no longer just about the fruit. It is about what the fruit represents, the power to discern good and evil, to be more than she is. Can you imagine the force of that temptation? A promise so powerful that it could forever change your vision of the world, and more than that, your vision of yourself? Think about the power of that offer. How many times in life do we seek exactly that, the ability to discern, to know, to control what surrounds us? Isn't there something in us that also desires to be like God, in a sense? Not in arrogance, but in the desire to understand, to reach beyond our limitations. Eve is on the verge of transformation. The serpent offers more than just a simple fruit. It offers a new way of being, a change of state, of consciousness. Suddenly, the garden around her seems less important. The trees, the flowers, the harmony of Eden, all of it fades beside the possibility of opening her eyes to a new reality. And what would this new reality be? Eve knows that eating the fruit means crossing a line. But she feels that by crossing it, something grand could be revealed. Have you ever stood before a decision that seemed to carry such a great weight? That moment when you know that, once made, nothing will ever be the same? The serpent's offer wasn't one of immediate destruction, but of profound change. Your eyes will be opened, and there's something very powerful in that. Eve's eyes would open, and she would see what had been hidden. How many times in our lives do we wish for the same thing? To see beyond appearances, to understand the mysteries that surround us, to uncover what is hidden. Eve, like us, stands before a promise that resonates in the human heart to this day. The thirst for knowledge, the desire to understand what surrounds us. And at its core, what the serpent offers is the essence of this pursuit, the capacity to know good and evil. Now stop and think, if you were in Eve's place with that promise before you, what would you do? Would you be able to resist the idea of opening your eyes to something that had been hidden until then? Or, like her, would you also be drawn to the promise of greater wisdom? This is the great question. What does this pursuit of knowledge mean for us today? Are we also tempted in our own lives to open our eyes to things God asks us not to touch? And when we do we truly find what we expected? The scene shifts dramatically in Genesis 3:22, after Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit. God, observing what has happened, makes a profound and unsettling statement. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. This declaration is revealing because it shows the divine acknowledgement that humanity now possesses a new capacity, a wisdom that was previously reserved only for God himself. But what does this new knowledge mean? And why, after this, does God expel them from the garden, preventing them from reaching the tree of life, the one that could grant them immortality? Imagine for a moment the weight of this decision. Adam and Eve, who had lived in divine innocence, are suddenly confronted with an entirely new consciousness. Their eyes, once blind to the concept of evil, are now open. They see the world differently. And with this new vision comes the burden of responsibility, guilt, and perhaps even regret. This knowledge of good and evil wasn't just about distinguishing between right and wrong. It was something deeper. It was an understanding of the existence of evil, of suffering, and of the consequences of choices. Have you ever had a moment in your life when, after making a major decision, you felt the weight of a new reality? When something that once seemed clear suddenly became far more complex, laden with nuances you hadn't foreseen? This is the burden that Adam and Eve now carry. And this is why, in his infinite wisdom, God decides to expel them from Eden. If they, in this new state, had access to the tree of life, they would live forever, bearing the weight of this knowledge. Immortality, in that condition, would be an unbearable burden. God prevents them from reaching the tree, not as a punishment, but as an act of mercy. The expulsion from the garden is, in essence, a protective measure. Humanity, now conscious of evil, was not prepared to live eternally with that new reality. Immortality without redemption would mean an eternity of suffering. And what about us? How many times in our pursuit of wisdom and knowledge do we encounter truths that completely change our perception of life? Truths that, instead of bringing relief, bring a weight we weren't expecting? Sometimes in our eagerness to know, we end up facing a burden that only time or divine grace can help us carry. The expulsion from Eden is not just the end of Adam and Eve's story. It is the beginning of a new journey. A journey that, no matter how painful, is full of possibilities for redemption. By preventing access to the tree of life, God opens the way for humanity to find a new form of eternal life in the future, not based on pure knowledge, but on grace and love. Now tell me, what do you think about the idea that the expulsion from Eden was, in fact, an act of mercy? Have there been moments in your life when something that seemed like a loss was actually a greater protection, a detour that led you on a different, yet essential path? The serpent in the Garden of Eden, with its cunning and mystery, carries rich and multifaceted symbolism. By viewing it as more than just a deceiver, we are confronted with layers of meaning that go beyond the traditional narrative. The serpent emerges as a figure full of complexity, representing the eternal conflict that exists within each of us. It is a symbol of temptation, yes, but also of curiosity. In a strange way, it reveals the human desire to understand what is beyond our reach. And this quest, this curiosity, is what makes us human, isn't it? What would we be without that constant restlessness, without the thirst to know more, to grasp what has been hidden from us? Perhaps the serpent represents not just evil, but a part of us that cannot be ignored, the part that drives us to explore, to challenge the limits of knowledge, to ask why in the face of the unknown. And this, dangerous as it may be, is also part of what makes us in the image of God. We were created with the desire to know, to expand, to transcend. Now imagine yourself in the shoes of Adam and Eve. One moment, you are living in harmony, in a paradise where everything is provided. But in another, you find yourself standing before a choice that could change everything. Was the serpent wrong in challenging that order? Was what it did entirely evil? Or was it an invitation to explore the depths of what it means to be truly free? The serpent makes us question. And in our own lives, we are often confronted by difficult questions. How many times do we find ourselves in situations where we must choose between what we've been told is right and what we feel we need to discover for ourselves? The serpent then becomes a mirror of our own spiritual journey. The conflict between obedience and questioning, between accepting and challenging, is something we face every day. At its core, it reminds us that life is full of mysteries, and that sometimes the path to wisdom leads through territories we'd rather avoid. Could it be that, in the end, the serpent was fulfilling a greater role? A role that involved confronting us with our own limitations, while simultaneously opening our eyes to what it means to have free will? And you, have you ever found yourself standing before a choice that seemed to challenge you to push beyond a limit? How did you handle it? Could it be that there are moments when curiosity serves as a gateway to something deeper, to a wisdom we cannot reach any other way? The serpent is undoubtedly a mysterious and multifaceted symbol, leading us to reflect on our own desire to understand the unknown. At the end of this journey, we arrive at a conclusion that transcends the narrative. The serpent, Adam, Eve, Eden, all these elements point to something much greater. The need to approach sacred texts with depth and openness, always searching for more than mere literal interpretations. The story of Genesis, and specifically that of the serpent, is not just a lesson in obedience or disobedience. It is an invitation to delve into the hidden layers of biblical wisdom, to understand that what seems clear on the surface may contain profound secrets. The serpent is a figure full of mysteries, but so is the life of faith. How often do we find ourselves in situations where what seems right and wrong becomes blurred, where the choices are not as simple as they appear? The serpent, in its complexity, teaches us that understanding the truth requires courage. The courage to question, to explore, and to accept that we may not always have all the answers. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt the need to search further, to question more, before accepting what seemed to be the obvious truth? This story, when looked at closely, challenges us to do exactly that. What we learn from this narrative is that knowledge, faith, and spirituality are not static. They move, they provoke us, and often we are called to see beyond what we've been taught, to dive into mysteries that only reveal themselves to those who dare to ask. The path of faith is, in many ways, a journey of discovery, a constant search for what lies beyond what the eyes can see. Thus, we are invited to deeply reflect on our own spiritual lives. Are we open to seeing what God is truly revealing in each detail of the Scriptures? Are we ready to recognize that the serpent is not merely a symbol of evil, but a catalyst for growth, for the understanding of who we are? And more importantly, are we willing to accept that sometimes the temptation to know more is part of the process of spiritual maturity? Finally, I extend to you an invitation, as the narrative suggests. Why not approach this text and others with an open heart and mind, ready to go beyond what is said, to seek what is hidden? May this journey of discovery draw you closer to God, and may a deep study of the Scriptures always reveal more to you about God, about life, and about yourself.